Gosh darn it, you carpet-bagging Yankee Doodle. Stan, you left your banana peel on the ground. Anyways, hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course U.S. History. Today we'll be talking about walking and running. You know, immigration and migration. Cue the music, Stan. Here on Crash Course, I'll be talking about all the immigration and migration that occurred throughout American history. Now it all starts with the land bridge. No, Stan, not the London Bridge, the land bridge. Dummy. The land created by the Ice Age allowed many people to come to America for the first time. People from Asia migrated over to the Americas and were stuck there after the bridge collapsed. Now, these people were the ancestors of the Native Americans. But we don't see any Native Americans. Why? Because of the whites! No, the English came for gold, God, and glory. The English colonists that settled down in the South, Jamestown, Virginia, came for money. However, they were met with terrible conditions. They had to face winter, Indians, and disease. Disease always ruining everything for America. Anyhow, the starving time of 1610 specifically was horrible. Some colonists even had to resort to eating each other. Thigh soup.
Did you say eating?
Gah! Me from the past! Sheesh! Ooh, sorry. I didn't get to change the clothes. It was getting pretty hot. Anyhow, Northern English colonists came for religious freedom. The Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Bay on the Mayflower, and on it they created the Mayflower Compact, which was the first sign of democracy. Later on, the Pilgrims joined to form a bigger group with the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The English weren't the only ones to come to the New World to become rich. The Dutch came for money and fur trade. They created New Amsterdam, which is now known as New York. The French also came for fur trade. They landed in Canada, Quebec, and the Spanish came to conquer the land. Oh yeah, I forgot about the Vikings. They were led by Leif Erikson, and they formed the Newfoundland in Canada, and they just left.
Mr. Green, what are the effects of the European people coming to America?
Well, me from the past. The effects of Europeans coming to America were terrible. They brought many diseases like smallpox and yellow fever, and they also massacred many Indians to get their land. Slavery. I can't forget about slavery. John Rolfe introduced tobacco to Jamestown in 1613. Indentured servants were brought over via the headright system to work on plantations and fields. And later on, because of the Bacon Rebellion, slavery became the primary source of labor. In 1619, the first African Americans were brought over via the Atlantic slave trade. More and more immigrants came over to Europe during the late 1700s. German immigrants, mistakenly known as the Pennsylvania Dutch, made about 6% of the population by 1775. They left Prussia, Germany in order to escape from religious persecution, economic oppression, and the ravages of war. Scots-Irish came over to America in order to escape from the poverty-stricken life in Ireland. The Scot-Irish were Scottish people who were kicked out of Scotland, and so they moved to Northern Ireland, but they did not prosper there. In 1775, they numbered around 7% of the population, about 175,000 people, and they lived in Pennsylvania. America then became known as the melting pot because all these immigrants brought diverse culture. After the war, King George III created the Proclamation Line of 1763 in order to keep better relationship with the natives. It stated that no one could move west of the Appalachian Mountains, but many colonists still moved west because, they hated the English crown. Now, onto some acts that increased immigration in the size of the United States. The Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787 finally allowed areas to become states of at least 60,000 people settled down. And as for the Land Ordinance of 1785, man, aren't they great at naming things? Anyways, Congress gained the Ohio River Valley, so when Americans decided to move westward, they could buy the land off of the government. During this time, Thomas Jefferson was president, and he was the responsible one for doubling the size of America with the Louisiana Purchase. He bought it for Napoleon for about $10 million. As a result, many immigrants were coming over, and over-speculation was occurring. Many people were moving over to the Ohio River Valley. During the early to mid-1800s, there was still a lot of immigration going on. There was mass migration by Americans, Mexicans, and Native Americans. Americans flocked Texas, which was owned by Stephen Austin, an American who was selling off cheap land. Years later, Americans overtook the Mexican population, and they decided to revolt. Because that's all we know how to do, revolt. And so, because of the Texas Rebellion, we are in Texas in 1836. Yay, Texas! A few years before Texas was the rise of Andrew Jackson, a famous war hero during the War of 1812. He was a rough fellow because he hated the Native Americans. He passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Then what followed was horrible. Cherokee Indians were forced from their homes to reservations in Oklahoma. This was known as the Trail of Tears. My head hurts. I think I'm gonna go outside to get some fresh air. All this killing and massacring is really bringing down my morale. Wow, the world really is beautiful outside.
Extra, extra.
Oh! What is this? The mystery document? Anyways, the rules here are simple. If I get the author correct of the mystery document, I'm okay. If I get it wrong, I get RKO'd. On the morning of November the 17th, we encountered a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures. And from that day until we reached the end of the fateful journey on March the 26th, 1839, the sufferings of the Cherokees were awful. The trail of exiles was a trail of death. They had to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire. And I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. So this definitely has to deal with the Trail of Tears, where the Cherokee Indians were forced to move west, like in horrible conditions, where many died. Author of this probably has to be Andrew Jackson. I'm gonna go with Andrew Jackson. Is it Andrew Jackson?
Brr.
Ah, who is it? John Jean Burnett? Who the heck is that? Do I actually have to get RKO'd right now, Stan? Ah, gosh, sheesh. Come at me anytime. Ah.
Hello, Crash Course viewers. Due to an unfortunate accident, John Green is now in the hospital, so I, Stan, will now take over. Now let's go to the thought bubble. During the late 1840s, Irish immigrants came over because of the potato famine and because of the oppressive English. German immigrants, also known as 48ers, came over too. The huge influx of immigrants caused a huge rise in nativism. As a result, parties such as the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, also known as the Know Nothings, rose to prominence. Also during this time was the Manifest Destiny. Americans were moving west. Many Americans moved west using the Oregon Trail, and many of those who embarked on such a journey died, mainly because of disease. However, there's one such group that had the worst luck ever. The Donner Party was a group of Americans that tried to go through a shortcut to get to California. The shortcut failed drastically, and they were stuck for winter in the Sierra Nevada. In the end, many of them had to resort to cannibalism to survive. Now on to California, because I just mentioned it. Because of the Mexican-American War, Americans now had access to California. When gold was found in California, many Americans, along with immigrants ranging from European and Asian, went over looking to strike it rich. Many of which did not end up rich, rather homeless and without any way to go back home. Texas also entered the Union during the time period of the Manifest Destiny. Now, onto the Civil War era. There was a ton of migration and immigration during this time period, but mostly migration. During the war, and especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans escaped from the South to the North for freedom. All the immigrants that came over to America came to the North and not the slave-owning South, because who wants to compete with slaves? Now, let's talk about railroads. Railroads greatly influenced the American way of life because they made cities grow in population and size. In the 1860s, more and more immigrants came over to the U.S., and they were taken care of by political machines, or powerful political groups that used voter fraud to keep their power. Also, during this time period was new immigration, or people coming over from Southeast Europe instead of the normal Germany, France, and England. Congress also passed the Homestead Act, which gave people 160 acres of land as long as they lived on it and cultivated it. Now, this act was too great to be true, since the land was dead and dry. At least it was free. Just kidding, it was $18. Asian immigrants also came over, and the Chinese were responsible for building the Transcontinental Railroad, along with the Irish. Now, this was a terrible time for Native Americans because they were forced into smaller and smaller reservations. So during the early 1900s...
Oh, my neck. Hey, what the heck? Stan, get out! That's my job! What you doing, man? Get out! Right now!
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sheesh, I knew I shouldn't have done that mystery document. Gah. Hey, Stan, what time era are we in?
Early 1900s.
Oh, okay. Early 1900s? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, so Americans, along with the Japanese and Chinese workers, went over to Hawaii to plant sugar. And after the Spanish-American War, many Americans moved over to the new colonies that Americas had acquired. Also, during World War I, African Americans moved north in order to get more jobs and land.
Mr. Green, so how did World War I affect all that immigration stuff?
Well, me from the past. Sooner or later, in your APUSH history class of your junior year in high school, taught by the best teacher ever, Mrs. Arnold, you will learn that Americans started retreating to isolationism following the World War I. Americans also began to regulate immigrants. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921 limited immigration down to 3% nationality. And later on, the Immigration Act of 1924 cut that down to 2%. The Ku Klux Klan also got stronger because of the intolerance towards immigrants. They reached 5 million members, and they definitely were a formidable Oh wow, that's a tongue twister. Formidable political power. Formidable political power. They hated on anyone who was white and Protestant. Today they have about 5,000 members and all they have is a website that sells stupid dumb t-shirts. During LBJ's administration, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was passed. It increased the number of immigrants that were able to come to America, whether their race or origin, and repealed the Immigration Act of 1924. Also, Americans began to move out of the crowded cities and into suburbs like Levittown. Most of these Americans were white Americans. This was known as the White Flight. And that's all I have for today, folks. However, we must remember that history reminds us that revolutions are not events, so much that they're processes, that for tens and thousands of years, people have been making decisions that are irrevocably shaping the world that we live in today. Just as today, we are making subtle, irrevocable decisions that people of the future will remember as revolutions. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you on Crash Course and never. This episode of Crash Course was produced by Connie, Nick, and Daryl, directed by Connie, Nick, and Daryl, acted by Connie, Nick, and Daryl, written by Connie, Nick, and Daryl, mostly Connie, but Connie, Nick, and Daryl. Thank you for tuning in, and as the people in my hometown say, don't forget to be awesome.